I don't know why, but Alice Bailey, when she first moved to New York to start a publishing company in the Lucis Trust and a publishing company, she called it the Lucifer Publishing Company.
Right.
Alice Bailey was born in 1880 to a wealthy, aristocratic British family. She was a member of the Anglican Church and as such received a thorough Christian education. In her autobiography, she states that at the age of 15, on June 30th, 1895, Bailey was visited by a stranger. She writes, "It was a Sunday morning. The previous Sunday I had heard a sermon which had aroused all my aspiration. This Sunday, for some reason, I had not gone to church. All the rest of the house party had gone, and there was no one in the house but myself and the servants. I was sitting in the drawing room, reading. The door opened, and in walked a tall man dressed in European clothes, very well cut, I remember, but with a turban on his head. He came in and sat down beside me. I was so petrified at the sight of the turban that I could not make a sound or ask what he was doing there. Then he started to talk. He told me there was some work that it was planned that I could do in the world, but that it would entail my changing my disposition very considerably. I would have to give up being such an unpleasant little girl and must try and get some measure of self-control. My future usefulness to him and to the world was dependent upon how I handled myself and the changes I could manage to make. He said that if I could achieve real self-control, I could then be trusted and that I would travel all over the world and visit many countries, doing your master's work all the time." Years passed, and at the age of 22, Bailey started to do evangelical work in connection with the YMCA and the British Army. This took her abroad to India, where in 1907 she met her future husband, Walter Evans. The marriage did not last between the two, however, due to the abusive nature of her husband, and Bailey pushed and received a divorce. She left with their 3 children after their formal separation in 1915. Then followed a very difficult period in which she worked in a sardine factory in Southern California to support herself and her children. It was at this low point in Bailey's life that her esoteric transformation began. She came across 2 pupils of Madame Blavatsky of the Theosophical Society, who took her as their mentor and led her through what is known as the Secret Doctrine. The Secret Doctrine consisted of 2 volumes, the first volume being named Cosmogenesis and the second Anthropogenesis. Written by Helena Blavatsky, it describes the synthesis of science, religion, and philosophy in a pseudo-scientific esoteric fashion. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, often known as Madame Blavatsky, was a Russian and American mystic and author who co-founded the Theosophical Society in 1875. She was the 19th century most famous and notorious occultist and a declared Luciferian, who proposed Satan, the enemy of God, is in reality the highest divine. Blavatsky's teachings argued that Satan, or Lucifer, or the devil, as she often uses the names interchangeably, brought mankind spiritual wisdom and is the spirit of intellectual enlightenment and freedom of thought. Excerpts from her books reveal a true Luciferian agenda within its pages. Here are just some examples from her writings. Quote, "Lucifer represents life, thought, process, civilization, liberty, independence. Lucifer is the Logos, the serpent, the Savior. And now it stands proven that Satan, or the red fiery dragon, the Lord of Phosphorus, and Lucifer, or the light bearer, is in us. It is our mind. But in iniquity and reality, Lucifer, or Luciferus, is the name of the angelic entity presiding over the light of truth as over the light of day. Lucifer is divine and terrestrial light, the Holy Ghost and Satan, at one and at the same time, visible space being truly filled with the differentiated breadth, invisibility, and the astral light. It is but natural, even from the dead letter standpoint, to view Satan, the serpent of Genesis, as the real creator and benefactor, the father of spiritual mankind. For it is he who was the harbinger of light, bright, radiant Lucifer, who opened the eyes of the automation created by Jehovah as alleged, and he who was the first to whisper, "In the day ye eat thereof ye shall be as Elohim, knowing good and evil," can only be regarded in the light of a Savior. These passages are just a taste of Madame Blavatsky's teaching, referring to Lucifer as holy, the creator, and a light bringer. And it is Madame Blavatsky's teaching that Alice Bailey held in highest esteem. In 1917, Bailey became involved in the Theosophical Society, and just a year later, a member of the esoteric section. In 1919, Foster Bailey, who was to be her second husband, became National Secretary of the Theosophical Society, and in 1921 they were married. The Theosophist published the first few chapters of Bailey's first work, Initiation, Human, and Solar, but then stopped for reasons Bailey called theosophical jealousy and reactionary attitude. Not long after, Mr. and Mrs. Foster Bailey started a progressive Back to Blavatsky movement, where Alice outlined her vision for the esoteric section of the Theosophical Society. However, her efforts to influence the society failed, and she and her husband were dismissed from their positions. And it was with that Alice and Foster Bailey founded the Lucifer Publishing Company, with the primary intention to publish Bailey's many books. After the first 2 or 3 years, the name was then changed to Lucis Publishing Company because of the negative backlash Bailey received. Here is a list of her works, just to name a few. The Consciousness of the Atom, The Destiny of the Nations, Discipleship in the New Age, Letters on the Occult Meditation, The Light of the Soul, Problems of Humanity, The Rays and the Initiations, and a treatise on white magic. In 1923, with the help of Foster Bailey, Alice Bailey founded the Arcane School, which is part of Lucis Trust. It provided educational correspondence, meditation instruction, and guided study based on her writings. Its activities included the Arcane School, World Goodwill, Triangles, and a quarterly magazine called The Beacon. It is important to note concerning Foster Bailey that in 1913 he was initiated into the Charles W. Moore Lodge of Freemasons, where he rose to 33rd degree and wrote the book The Spirit of Masonry. In 1955, Alice Bailey wrote in her book Discipleship in the New Age, quote, "Evidence of growth of human intellect along the needed receptive lines for the preparation of the New Age can be seen in the planning of various nations and in the efforts of the United Nations to formulate a world plan. From the very start of this unfoldment, 3 occult factors have governed the development of all these plans." Although she did not spell out clearly the identity of these 3 occult factors, she did reveal to her students that, quote, "Within the United Nations is the germ and seed of a great international meditating reflective group, a group of thinking and informed men and women in whose hands lies the destiny of humanity. This is largely under control of many fourth-ray disciples. If you could but realize it, and their point of meditative focus is the intuitional or Buddhic plane, the plane upon which all hierarchical activity is today to be found." This shocking revelation that Bailey revealed in her writings not only shows that Luciferians were, at the time, in positions of power in the United Nations, but also how they were actively using their knowledge and power of the occult to further the New Age. Bailey continued to work up until the time of her death in 1949, but her teachings and Lucis Trust lived on. And that brings us now to the present day, where the Luciferian agenda has been completely embedded into our top global institutions. Today, the Lucis Trust Association serves the UN as a member of the Economic and Social Council. The program, called World Goodwill, enjoys consultative status, which permits it to have a close working relationship with the UN, including a seat on the weekly sessions. At one point in time, the Lucis Trust office in New York was located at 666 United Nations Plaza, but has since then changed to 866. A statement on Lucis Trust's website reads, "As such, the Trust and the World Goodwill are part of a community of many hundreds of NGOs that play an active role in the United Nations, particularly in spreading information about the UN and fostering support for the UN programs. Since their inception, Lucis Trust and World Goodwill have given their support through meditation, educational materials, and seminars by highlighting the importance of the UN's goals and activities as they represent the voice of the peoples and the nations of the world." This sounds good and all, but now knowing the background behind Lucis Trust, one can speculate that the meditation, educational materials, and seminars would be centered around Bailey's teachings, and therefore be completely Luciferian in nature. In Alice Bailey's book called Education for a New Age, she suggests that in the New Age, quote, "world citizenship should be the goal of the enlightened, with a world federation and a world brain," end quote. In other words, a one-world government, a new world order. If you dig a little, you will find the United Nations has long been one of the foremost world harbingers for a global new spirituality and a gathering of a new world order based on ancient occult and free Masonic principles. For example, here is a clip from Bill Cooper's Hour of the Time broadcast, where he describes the United Nations meditation room.
The World Goodwill Bulletin is published by Lucis Press Limited, owned by Lucis Trust, at 88 Edgware Road, Marble Ark, London, W2, England. This company, ladies and gentlemen, was originally established as the Lucifer Publishing Company, but changed its name on November the 11th, 1924, to the less startling one it bears today. Alice A. Bailey, the now deceased High Priestess of the Occult Arcane School, established and headed the Trust and its self-identified Society of Illumined Minds. This powerful group has intimate connections with the United Nations. The World Goodwill Bulletin issued a special edition on the United Nations in July 1957, which contained an article entitled, quote, "Lodestone," unquote. We quote from its description of the meditation room. Quote, "The visitor will be totally unprepared for what he will see as he steps in the door for a moment of quiet. Because of the converging walls and the dim light, he will experience a peculiar spatial disorientation, and dimension and perspective will seem difficult to establish. In the center of the room, he will see, illuminated by a single point of light from the ceiling, a rectangular mass. The ore piece is many millions of years old. One feels as though one is in a repository for some natural talisman of significant and noble importance, rather than in a chapel in the ordinary sense. Those who are wedded to seeking communion in traditional settings may be somewhat ill at ease here. This is a sudden break with prior experience. One is thrown violently upon his own resources. The room and the concept do not seem indicative of the supplications or the dualistic concept of the mystic, in which illumination is sought as a boon granted by deity. Rather, seemingly inherent in the decoration of the room, in the pinpoint of light playing on the ore, is the concept of a personal concentration of forces, creating a focus that illumines the field of attention. The pinpoint of light, the void of space, the illuminated crystalline ore, one feels projected into a setting of cosmological symbolism rather than one of planetary or even solar intent. It is interesting to speculate on what the long-term influence of this new departure will be on current religious thinking. Ensconced here in the highest hall of man, it cannot be inconsiderable. Whatever interpretations one may attribute to the United Nations Meditation Room, it can be said with certainty that the words and the repercussions have only just begun, unquote.
On World Invocation Day in 1952, Eleanor Roosevelt, wife of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, recorded a brief message which included the Great Invocation.
This is Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt speaking from New York within the United Nations building. We're living today in a troubled world. In many parts of the world, people have a sense of discouragement as to whether they will ever solve their difficulties. And it seems to me that those of us who feel that a spiritual leadership is necessary in the world are looking for ways in which to express what we feel. And someone sent me the other day an invocation. It is called the Great Invocation. And it seems to me to express the aspirations held by many people throughout the world, so I'm going to read it to you on this program. The Great Invocation. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the Master knows and serves. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth.
Tri Chinmoy, the New Age guru meditation leader at the UN, wrote, "The United Nations is the chosen instrument of God. To be a chosen instrument means to be a divine messenger, carrying the banner of God's inner vision and outer manifestation." On August 28th through the 31st of 2000, preceding the Millennium Summit, which commemorated the 50th anniversary of the United Nations, the Millennium Peace Summit of Religious and Spiritual Leaders was held. Around 200 individuals participated, including 1,000 religious leaders representing Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, and other traditions. UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, in the address to the summit, said the following: "This summit of religious and spiritual leaders is without doubt one of the most inspiring gatherings ever held here. Whatever your past, whatever your calling, and whatever the differences among you, your presence here at the United Nations signifies your commitment to our global mission of tolerance, development, and peace. The peace that the UN wants to bring is not without a high price. As William Jasper, author of A New World Religion, described so well in this presentation at the John Birch Society in 1993.
It has been nearly 50 years since the end of World War II, when a war-weary world embraced a dangerous idea and a dangerous organization. Not since World War II, not since that time nearly 50 years ago, has the United Nations enjoyed such an apparent popularity and resurgence of support in this country. I find that alarming. Not too many years ago, like many Americans, I was an avid supporter of the United Nations. Like many, I viewed it as it had been presented to me in the standard textbook presentation as a noble aspiration of mankind for peace, brotherhood, goodwill, and harmony, and mankind's last best hope for peace, for an end to war. However, the intervening years, the last couple of decades, and a great deal of research and reporting on the United Nations have changed my idea of it considerably. I contend, and the subject of my book is that the United Nations, from all the recorded history that we have of it, from its founding, from its founders, those who designed it, the UN Charter, those who organized the support for it in this country, from all that we know of it, the United Nations indeed is not, has not been an organization designed to bring about world peace. It is an organization that has been designed and promoted and continuously projected by those who have been in the forefront of its support to become a world government. One of the most important journals in the world today, Time calls the most influential journal in print, is Foreign Affairs, published by the Council on Foreign Relations. This particular issue is the winter 92-93 issue, the current issue of Foreign Affairs. Very important because there is an article in here by Boutros Boutros-Ghali, Secretary General of the United Nations, in this special issue, which is titled Advice for Mr. Clinton, Advice for President Clinton. I'd like to just open by reading for the first couple of sentences from Boutros-Ghali's article entitled Empowering the United Nations. We hear a lot of this today. I'll cover a few more examples of this. Over and over again we hear of the need to empower the United Nations. And here's how he begins. A new chapter in the history of the United Nations has begun. With newfound appeal, the World Organization is being utilized with greater frequency and growing urgency. The new era has brought new credibility to the United Nations. Together, the international community and the UN Secretariat need to seize this extraordinary opportunity to expand, adapt, and reinvigorate the work of the United Nations so that the lofty goals as originally envisioned by the Charter can begin to be realized. Unfortunately, far too many Americans are at present going along with that view that the United Nations needs to be energized, that it needs to be reinvigorated, and it's evident everywhere we look in the press today, in the media. Associated Press article here, time for the UN to wage war to win peace. The end of the Cold War may spur stronger world government. Mr. Strobe Talbot, editor-at-large of Time magazine, tells us here in his major article here, The Birth of the Global Nation. Of course, Mr. Talbot has now been appointed by the President to be his representative to the Soviet Union, or to Russia. Mr. Talbot tells us in this editorial of his, but it has taken the events of our wondrous and terrible century to clinch the case for world government. And he goes on to say, federalism has provided the most successful of all political experiments, and organizations like the World Federalist Association have for decades advocated it as the basis for global government. The World Federalist Organization, which he mentions, has again become very active and is taking out advertisements, for instance, like this one in the New York Times. John Anderson here pictured. John Anderson, 1980 presidential candidate, asks your support for a UN World Federation. World peace requires world laws. Global problems require global governance. Join John Anderson now in working to transform the United Nations into an empowered, democratic world federation with, goes on to list here, global legislative powers, enforcement powers, judicial powers. I see this movement taking shape in one community after another. This up in Middletown, Connecticut, the Middletown Press, just as I was there a couple of days ago, on the front page, we see former Socialist Prime Minister of Jamaica, Michael Manley, calling for New World Order. Manley, New Order brings hope, despair. And in here, Mr. Manley says that the United Nations must be given new powers over the world economy and over the world environment. The United Nations must become the global regulatory force. At the same time, in Hartford, Connecticut, the same day, we see several programs being promoted on the United Nations and the New World Order. Here's one called The Search for the New World Order by Ambassador Charles Hill at Hartford Seminary. Even in American Legion, we see. American Legion, which has usually been very strong on protecting American sovereignty and whatnot. In the current issue, March 93, we have an article, A Better Way to Keep the Peace. Instead of relying on the U.S. military, the United Nations should form its own permanent standing force. One of the most blatant examples of this appeared 2 weeks ago on CNN, a program called Our Planetary Police, in which the United Nations was enthusiastically endorsed and urged to take on new responsibilities, not only in what is traditionally called UN peacekeeping, but in UN enforcement of global environmental edicts from the United Nations.
Those of us who have been awoken to the truth understand the true deception behind the United Nations, not only the plot to bring on the New World Order, but to be the harbingers of a one-world religion whose roots and foundation are the Luciferian cult. 2 Corinthians 11:13-15 states, "For such people are false apostles, deceitful workers, masquerading as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It is not surprising then if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness. Their end will be what their actions deserve." And in Matthew 24:24 it states, "For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect." This is why now, more than ever, we as Christians must expose the darkness behind Lucifer's so-called light and not fall prey to his deception. The world as we know it has changed. For this, people's hearts have become calloused, and they hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. But blessed are your eyes, because they see, and your ears, because they hear.